Hey class, welcome to week 1 of Social Work 639. I'm just going to take some time to go over the week 1 readings and assignments. This week is going to be related to crisis intervention, critical incidents, managing suicide prevention, and working with first responders. You'll see that there are 2 chapters. There's some excerpts from chapter 1 and this is the Goldstein book, but you'll have them electronic copies of these readings. You'll read excerpts from chapter 1 as well as chapter 8. And then you have just some resources related to crisis intervention and critical incident stress debriefing with law enforcement. You'll see some different models for short-term crisis treatment. So you'll see psychological first aid right here. One that I have been pretty familiar with has been a critical incident stress debriefing. This is something that I know when I was working in a hospital setting during the COVID-19 pandemic that we used pretty regularly in helping the first responders and especially the nursing staff manage emotions related to the COVID-19 pandemic. They can be used in a variety of different ways. A lot of these models are used with a wide range of incidents from, one example would be mass layoffs in a company, to all the way to large disasters such as the 9/11 disaster, or fires. House fires are something that this is often used with, whether it be helping the first responders involved or the families who are involved. These are things that are meant to be short-term, in the moment debriefs. Psychological first aid, is a good term, and this is the model for psychological first aid. Essentially putting a quick Band-Aid on the stress until you can later process that stress. So they're not meant to go in depth with processing. They're meant to manage emotions in the moment and gain the skills to avoid any long-term consequences or really to reduce the risk of PTSD symptoms. You'll see week 1 videos here. Skills in Youth Suicide Prevention, a psychotherapy.net video, as well as a PTSD training documentary for first responders. So since this is the first week of this particular course, we're going to have just an intro post, not necessarily, introducing yourself to the class because you all had the previous course together. But I want to know more about what your thoughts are in terms of your development as a social worker at this point in your education. Provide some thoughts on what your strengths are. This is really important to recognize the strengths that you have and the things that you want to build on. And I also want to hear what some of your thoughts are in your ability to understand and apply different theories and interventions. I would also like you to respond to at least one classmate, preferably somebody who does not yet have any responses. Your second discussion this week is going to be related to the learning resources for week 1. You are going to choose to read one of these 4 scenarios here. You can choose any of the 4. Just make sure in your post that you identify which one you had chosen. And then I want you to outline the intervention techniques that you think that you would use with this scenario. I want you to focus on the readings from this week in particular. Remember, we're looking at those brief approaches, those in-the-moment approaches, not necessarily approaches that would require a long-term processing of trauma. We want to focus specifically on those crisis scenarios right now. So essentially, you're going to be looking at different particular skills that you might use in those brief sessions, and then how you might refer that particular client for whether it be for long-term treatment, what you might direct them to, what resources might be available to them within the community. And then lastly, we always want to make sure that we pay attention to ourselves. These are scenarios where you could very easily experience vicarious trauma, and you need to focus a bit more on self-care. A lot of times in these circumstances, they are scenarios that maybe you have also experienced some emotions regarding, especially if they're major disasters. Many of us feel those feelings as well when we hear about really devastating kind of circumstances. I mentioned these are some things that were practiced within the COVID-19 pandemic in hospital settings for the staff within the hospital. For instance, COVID-19, that was something that we all experienced. So you want to remember that you need to first take care of yourself in order to be able to be present for your clients and effectively use these treatment models. So that's why that last point there is so incredibly important. And then for your response post, just respond to one of your classmates, provide some feedback on their chosen methods of intervention, and maybe give a suggestion or two of different skills that they maybe hadn't thought of that maybe they could use with that scenario. I think it would be helpful to choose to respond to somebody who maybe chose a different scenario than you. That's not a requirement by any means, but it could be useful to just see some people's thoughts on different types of scenarios as well. So that's all we have for week 1. As usual, just reach out if you have any questions, and I hope everyone has a great week.